Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. Whether you're a busy entrepreneur who's off on their own full-time, or you're actually balancing a side hustle with a corporate job and just trying to make sense of what you should be doing when to move your business forward, ultimately, it all comes down to time management. Time management is one of the biggest things that holds entrepreneurs back from unlocking their fullest potential, and it can really help you drive your progress forward and being able to finally quit that full-time job. I'm excited to welcome onto the show today, Laura Vanderkam. She is an expert in time management and the author of several time management and productivity books, including the new Tranquility by Tuesday, 9 Ways to Calm the Chaos and Make Time for What Matters, along with Juliet School of Possibilities, Off the Clock, I Know How She Does It, what most successful people would do before breakfast, and 168 Hours. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and Fortune. She's the host of the podcast Before Breakfast and the co-host with Sarah Hart Unger of the podcast Best of Both Worlds. She lives outside Philadelphia with her husband and 5 children and blogs at lauravanderkam.com. All the links will be in the show notes, guys, to get in touch with Laura. And she is just such a great resource on time management and productivity. This is something that we all need to be working on, and we can all gather some tips from her. There's in particular one tip that I absolutely love that she's going to share with us today about Fridays and a punch list. I cannot wait to have you hear all of her best tips and advice, and definitely go check out her book. If you share a takeaway from today's episode on social media and tag me at Shannon K. Weinstein and at Keep What You Earn, you'll be entered to win a copy of her book. Without further ado, let's hear from Laura. Hey, Laura, happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So could you just tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Laura. I write books on time management and productivity and also speak and host some podcasts on that topic. I'm always trying to help people spend more time on what matters and less time on what doesn't. I live outside Philadelphia with my family here.
And what made you so passionate about that particular topic of spending time on what matters?
Well, time is, such a fascinating concept because we all have the same amount of time, right? Everybody, no matter what else they have going on in their life, has 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week. And so when you find people who are doing amazing things with their lives, it could be that they are smarter or better looking than everybody else, but they don't have any more time. So they still need to figure out how to allocate their hours in ways that will create the life they want. And so, I've spent the past 15 years or so studying the schedules of people who do have really cool lives and see what I can learn from that and what I can share with everybody else.
What's one of the coolest things you've learned, or might have been like an unexpected discovery from your work?
Well, one thing I always think people find surprising is that part of success is not just about creating a perfect schedule. It's actually about creating a resilient schedule that can absorb whatever goes wrong in life. Lots of people get very frustrated that I've created this amazing schedule where I can do X, Y, and Z, and I've got time devoted to all these things. And then, the thunderstorm that causes a leak in your roof didn't care that you had a perfect schedule. And, your kid gets sick and it didn't matter that you had a perfect schedule, or whatever else can go wrong. And so you have to deal with it. If your expectation is that nothing will ever go wrong, very quickly, life will rise up and prevent you from doing whatever you wanted to do. Because the things that tend to fall by the wayside when life's emergencies happened are often the things we really wanted to do. So we need to build a schedule that allows for the emergencies to happen and still allows us to stay on track. So I've always been fascinated by people who do manage to create schedules that are resilient enough to deal with the unexpected.
Yeah, so resiliency over rigidity. I love that.
Yep.
And, like productivity, right, without any flexibility is going to just lead to chaos at some point. Because if you rely so heavily on this like time blocking, you can like perfectly time block your schedule, but you never know. Like you said, I just think of all these times that the power went out, or I got sick, or something happened where it's like, well, that just went to hell. And like now we have to completely pivot and change. And the more rigid everything is, or the more you over architect a calendar or a schedule, the harder it is to actually flex it. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets very challenging to stick with a perfect schedule. I say anyone can create a perfect schedule. The true time management masters create a resilient schedule.
And does that include like intentional white space? Like, what are the characteristics to you of a resilient schedule?
Absolutely. White space is a great idea. And when I suggest this to people, they're often like, oh, yes, I need more white space to think. I need to think deep thoughts. And I'm like, well, that's great if you get to use it for the deep thoughts. I'm talking more practicalities here, which is that you don't know at the start of any given day or any given week all the things that you will need to do by the end of it, right? So if your plans encompass 100% of the available time for the week, then when something arises, it will displace something and cause utter chaos. Because what does it displace? Like, it's important. Maybe if it's something that wasn't important, that's one thing. But if it is, then, that has to go somewhere, and then something else gets moved. And, pretty soon this beautiful schedule doesn't happen. So I try to leave, a couple hours open on Fridays. Usually, I try to leave a couple hours on there open. Different people, different things will work. Like if you have a very meeting or appointment heavy schedule, maybe it's that you leave an hour a day open, or, maybe it's 2 afternoons a week that you try to leave mostly open. And you don't give away that time until you are close to in it. But the upside of that is if really cool opportunities arise, like somebody, big new client wants to talk to you, wants to meet pretty quickly, you'd be like, oh yeah, if your Friday's open, we could talk on Friday, name your time, right? Just you can try to say that sort of thing. And because you have the space to deal with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's about having the adaptability to also how you're feeling that day. Cause there are certain days like you can't kind of, what should I say, like schedule creativity all the time. And you can't really schedule inspiration. So there are going to be times where stuff hits and you're like, but I've had this happen to me before too, where I go, I really want to do A because I'm in the mood to do that. But my calendar says I'm supposed to do B right now that I'm not in the mood to do. And if they're not like urgent, time sensitive things, I'm like, then why don't we just switch them? Like, it's like, why are you holding yourself to some other like past used plan of how you were going to feel today? And you have to really kind of be nimble to that. I feel like trying to over architect it and plan all this stuff out just it creates a lot of resistance, right?
Yeah. Past us has often very grand ideas of what future us should be able to do. It's one of the, quirks of human nature that we often think of our future selves as different people. And thus we are willing to overcommit them because I guess future us will have lots more time and energy than current us will have. But unfortunately, that tends not to be the case. It never quite works out that way. They seem awesome, really, but sadly will be us eventually.
Yeah, they don't know what you're going to go through in between. Like, I should be able to get that done. Do you find too, like, this is something I struggled with a lot, was having the best intentions to get a lot done and even externally promising something would get done and not really building that in any sort of like contingency plan, or maybe even setting too high of expectations for myself and for others and unrealistically breaking promises I've made to myself and to others, and then having a sense of guilt around it. Have you seen that happen with a lot of people?
Yeah, I mean, of course that happens. That's just the reality of, not figuring out, is this realistic, given all the things that are going on. I mean, if it requires everything to go perfectly to happen, we can be pretty sure that things will not all go perfectly, which means that it's highly unlikely to happen. But hopefully once people have experienced that a few times, as you become more, experienced veteran in whatever business you are doing, you start to think about those things, right? You start to build in a buffer on projects. You start to, figure out the constituent steps and build in little buffers for each of those. And so I've seen people do pretty amazing things like, they're in the hospital and yet the project still got turned in on time. And it's not that people wouldn't have understood. I mean, clearly you're injured, like you can't be there, but it's because it was done so far ahead of time that when this injury happened in the buffer, like it didn't even matter. Like the last few things, like somebody else can just, finish up. And so everything still stayed on track. And, we can't always conveniently time our emergencies or anything like that. Now people are very understanding, hopefully, if they need to be. But I have generally found that when people are reliable, it's because they are thinking through that life will go wrong. How can I get ahead? How can I build in a buffer? What can I do now to make it easier for future me as opposed to making it harder for future me?
Totally agree. And then let's talk about tackling, time management from the standpoint of, let's say you have limited control over your own time, or you feel like you do. All of the external influences that come into your schedule, all of the different ways that maybe you are on someone else's calendar, technically. I felt this way in corporate a lot, where my calendar was just this thing anyone could put a Post-it note on and say, be here at this time, be here at this time, show up at this call, double, triple booked all the time. Let's talk about how to kind of take control of your own calendar. What are some of the ways that you recommend people take back that control of their time? Because like you said, it's a precious resource. We only have so much of it. We have to protect it.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why organizations use electronic calendars, but I think there's a misguided notion here, which is that when you want people to be available for meetings, like meetings are not the only thing that people are generally needing to do in their job. And I think that people who have thought this through, at least with their own small groups, their teams, try to aim toward a more meeting light sort of schedule. Like that a meeting isn't the only way to get an answer to a question. A meeting isn't the only way to make sure that people are still doing their jobs. A meeting isn't the only way to make sure that a deadline is met, that there's enough accountability to each other apart from that. So, if you say you're going to do something by Friday, you will. You don't need a meeting on Friday in order to, show up and say you did it, right? So, but that's a management issue. If you do not work for a manager who has, gotten their head around that idea, then I think you can always be the voice of reason on any given meeting. You can, call people up if they've scheduled a meeting and say, I want to make sure I'm as prepared as possible for this. Can you help me understand what decision we're going to be making as a result of this meeting? And if it's unclear, the person's like, well, I'm just trying to check in on X, Y, or Z. It's like, oh, well, I could give you an update right now on X, Y, and Z. And then hopefully that can clear it off, right? Or if you see something that you think is just somebody got on your calendar because they have a question for you, if you have a weekly planning time where you are looking at your upcoming week, see that on your calendar, just call the person and try to answer the question as quickly as possible so you could free up that time in the future as well. To keep any sort of meetings on track, like at the end of it, you can always say, when they say any questions, you'd be like, I would like to confirm that I'm doing X, Y, or Z coming out of this meeting on this date. And of course, that nudges the organizer to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing coming out of this. But here's like one little hack for people who are trying to protect space is if you have a work friend or accountability partner and both of you have agreed that you need some more space to think or do your job, you should schedule some meetings with each other that are not real meetings. They are just there, and people will respect them because you're meeting with somebody else, right? But in fact, the two of you are using that time to work on your priorities. And it's kind of sad that has to happen some places, but if that's what it takes, sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, and I actually agree with that. And I wish I had done that more often, because I would block time off on my own calendar, because luckily I show up as busy, right? They can't see the content. So I would just block off the time. But then I would get weak and I would be like there's people still blocking it. Or I would have this moment of weakness where I'm like, do I really need the whole morning blocked off? No, I'll take it down. And within an hour, there it goes again. And I open it back up out of just, well, I guess, you kind of have these moments of weakness. But I love that it's a bit of an accountability thing, because now you have someone to disappoint by canceling it. And that's actually a big motivator.
Their schedule opens up too, and then they get booked for meetings they don't want to be in. So
right. So it really is an accountability tool. I love that idea. Laura, talk to me about multitasking and compressing time. Like your thoughts on utilizing that as kind of a time management tactic, or I mean, is it really effective to try to do too many things at once?
Well, it depends what we mean by multitasking. If you're talking about can I check my email and answer it while I'm on a conference call? Like, no. I mean, you can, but you're not paying attention to one of the things. And, maybe it's because your call is pointless and you don't want to be on it, but then you shouldn't be on it, right? Like,
Right.
work at that to see if you can get out of that if you're not actively participating. Generally, it's better to do one thing at once, and not even just one thing at once, like have blocks of time. It doesn't have to be hours, but when you are attempting to do just one thing. So where people often go awry is they are flitting in and out of, say, their inboxes or Slack messages all day long. And I'm not saying you can't be responsive, but there's a big difference between being in your inbox for 20 minutes and then out for 40 minutes and then in for 20 minutes and out for 40 minutes versus being in and out every minute over the course of an hour. If you're doing that, you're never doing anything else. But if you do, 20 minutes in, 40 minutes out, you can do a lot in 40 minutes if you have any sort of focused work you need to do. But you're also being pretty responsive because, people only have to wait really about, 40, 50 minutes under that schedule if there's something urgent that you need to respond to. So in that sense, no, multitasking is not good. But there are other ways to think about multitasking, which is that certain things we bring into our lives can do multiple things at once. So, for instance, on one of my podcasts recently, I interviewed a woman who co-hosts a podcast about one of her hobbies with her husband. So if you think about how many activities that podcast is doing in one fell swoop, it's time devoted, as they're researching it, it's time devoted to their hobby, right? It's time spent together, which is regularly happening because they have to record these episodes that it would be easier not to do. So, something like that, it's multitasking, but it's kind of a cool way to think about multitasking. It's really deepening the number of jobs that an individual task can do.
It's productive time because it's maximizing output for the input. So it's like I'm spending 1 hour of time, but I'm getting these 3 different things I need to do or I want to do or I'd like to do, included in it, right?
Yeah, no. And so if you can think about how you could make that happen. So, people who would like to exercise more and would like to see their friends more. Well, how about you exercise with your friends, right? I mean, that would be one way to make that happen. I mean, if you live close enough where you could walk to work, if you could walk to work with a friend, that would be doing 3 things at once. It would be exercise, friend time, and getting you to work, which you have to do anyway. So, it's like, think about how you could do multiple jobs with one thing.
Yeah, I do the same thing with exercising and reading a book. I actually listen to Audible when I'm on my walks because I go, I'm going to get through a book and a hike. So it's going to be great. You're going to feed body and mind at the same time. Why not? So let's talk about like common mistakes people make when it comes to time management. Why is it that we don't feel like we have the same hours in a day? That people will feel like these other people, like you said, can accomplish so much with the same time. Why not me? What do you think is holding people back from unlocking that maximum potential of their time?
I think the biggest productivity problem people have is just not being intentional about their time. Like they don't know what specifically they want to do with any given day or week. I like to think of life in terms of weeks. So they haven't thought through the week and said, well, what is most important to me professionally? Like what is most important to me in terms of my relationships? What is most important to me personally over the course of the next week? If these are things that are already on my calendar, great. Like I can focus on them when I'm doing them and appreciate that they are important. If they are things that are not that yet there, how can I make sure that I have time for these things over the course of the next week? And then when you do those things, you've had a productive week. Like you obviously, define that as being a good week, as doing those things. And now you've done those things. So you've had a good week. And when you do that week after week after week, you can make lots of progress on various things. But it's about, choosing what you are going to do in any given moment. One woman I interviewed once used the metaphor of a Ferris wheel of like the different things that she was focusing on different points. And, like this was at the top this week, and then it could, she could make real progress on it and it moved. And then, this thing was the next thing she was going to focus on, make real progress on it and go to the next thing. And then it would come back around. But that way she could really advance like 4 projects at any given time by having something with each of them be the big thing in any given week, and sort of, just doing the whatever the minimum was to keep things moving forward for the other times.
And do you have any other, do you have examples from your own life where you've learned these types of lessons in your own time management? Have you had this happen to you where you've fallen victim to any of these habits, or you started implementing these and really saw a huge change or drastic outcome from that?
Yeah, I mean, I plan my weeks on Fridays, and sometimes, people ask how I manage my life, like if there's any particular secret I swear by or whatever. And it's just spending, 20 minutes on Fridays thinking through the upcoming week, thinking what is important to me in those different spheres and making sure they're happening, looking to see what I've already committed to, and if I have a plan for achieving those things. If I see any trouble coming in the upcoming week, like something really big is due Friday and Thursday is a mess, then that means I need to do stuff for it on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to make sure that it can happen for Friday. But if you don't have that time where you're looking forward and thinking about things, then you're just going day by day and everything is chaotic and it won't work. I've also learned to ask what can go wrong. I mean, I'm always anticipating that things will go wrong. And when they don't, I'm pleasantly surprised. And, I just, like the other day, I was recording something and I had a bunch of things I really needed quiet for. And of course, it was the day that tree trimmers showed up outside and all sorts of other noise was happening in the area. And I knew that, like I could see it coming up. So I rented a temporary office, and then I didn't actually wind up needing it. Like things got quiet during the times when I most needed quiet. So I was like, oh, it's fine. I don't actually need it. But it was, just peace of mind that comes from thinking about what can go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I did the same thing. I'm like laughing because I'm like, as a fellow podcaster, yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Because you never know when, I don't know when
tree
the gardener's going to show up. Yeah.
Chainsaws and leaf blowers are the bane of our existence. Yes.
Yep. And then we spend some of our time in Costa Rica, and where we live down there's constant construction right outside my window. Constant. Yep. Not to mention really loud music. So it's really funny because I'm like, what kind of day are we going to have today? Like I can't record between X and Y hours while they're working. And that's okay. I accommodate it. But what you do is you build around those different obstacles and you go, what's going to ensure me to be successful? I'm going to go do that. And then that way I don't have to create stress for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Less stress is always good.
Exactly. It's going to have you think clear, have you better plan everything that you need. So when you mentioned you plan ahead for your weeks, I do the same thing. I have to look ahead and go, are any of these days going to suck? Like, am I going to have, should I start clearing stuff off, moving things around, giving advance notice of hey, could we move this to Tuesday instead of Thursday? Because I got a loaded Thursday and I have no time to eat lunch, right? Looking at all this type of stuff and actually fitting in meals, which is funny for me to say I have to do now. But the other thing is, a lot of people don't enjoy tracking their time or really examining their time. I know a lot of people preach, the best way to manage your time better is to do some type of audit of your calendar or going through and how you're spending your time. Because as you mentioned, you have to focus on what matters. So it's the priorities that your calendar expresses and things like that. Do you recommend anything like that to actually do some type of current state evaluation of where you are? And what do you recommend for people who maybe aren't interested in I don't want to track every hour, every minute, everything? What are ways that they can get clarity on their calendar?
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's really not that big a deal to track time. Everyone should try it for at least a week. And a week is not that long. I've been doing this. I've been tracking my time for about 8 years now. You don't have to do 8 years, but 1 week is definitely doable. Just check in 3 to 4 times a day. Write down what you've done since the last time you checked in. You can usually remember the past few hours, but if you can't, just say, okay, can't remember, then check in again the next time. It's better to keep going than to get stuck on the fact that you can't remember any given hour. But it definitely increases the amount of time clarity once you see where the time really goes. So I would say it's really not that hard, really not that hard. And it allows you to make better decisions because, people have various stories about their lives, but if you don't have good data, then you're just telling yourself stories. Something you thought was a problem maybe isn't. Maybe something you haven't considered is taking more time than you might have imagined. So you want to make sure that you are working from good data. But I guess if somebody's not going to do that, you could always just ask yourself a couple of questions, like, what do you like about your life? Like, what's going great? Like, what do I want to celebrate about how I spend my time? You can also ask yourself what you want to spend more time doing. And you can ask yourself what you want to spend less time doing. I mean, the one problem with just asking those in the absence of data is I think that there are a lot of stories people tell themselves that aren't true about where the time goes. And so I've had a lot of people tell me like, oh, well, my problem is I'm working way too much. And my problem is I'm working around the clock. I need to find a way to work less. And then they actually track their time and they're working something like 40 hours a week, which is, not really unreasonable. And it's like, why do you feel you're working around the clock? Let's explore that, because it's not that the hours are the problem per se. It's something else. And so that's why I always just come back to the data is going to be better than anything else that you can look at.
I agree. And it's also asking yourself those questions, honestly, like what could you be doing less of? And it's not just how you're spending your time in the form of like the big chunks, but like really how many times did you check Slack between, A and B? How many times I think that's a big thing too, is how many times are you pulling yourself away from a focused area and then have to recover and come back to it? I feel like that can almost, whatever the opposite of collapse time is, it can make it feel longer because you feel like it's dragging on and on and on instead of just getting it done in a short period of time with a really heavy focus.
Yeah, that can definitely happen.
It can expand it. Yeah. What are some of your other best tips for folks who feel like they just want to get more control over their time and have their calendar start actually reflecting their priorities?
Well, I mean, I think asking yourself the question of what I do want to spend more time doing is good. Like people often have this idea that they have no free time whatsoever, and it's probably not true. They may not have as much free time as they want, but they probably have some. And so if that is the case, like imagine you had more free time. How would you like to spend it? Right? Let's make a long list of like anything you might want to spend more time doing in your life. Because once you see that, then you can start putting some of those things in. And maybe it's just choose a handful to focus on for the next month or two. Like, okay, well, I've decided that I want to go for more, lunchtime walks. And if that is the case, then all right, every time I have space available during lunch, I will do that. If you aim to do that for a couple of weeks, you will probably go for more lunchtime walks. But you wouldn't have thought about that if you hadn't identified that as something that you want to spend more time doing.
Agree. Totally agree. And something else I did similar to that was, God, I feel like I have not enough hours in the day to get done what I need to get done. I don't feel accomplished at the end of the day. So I actually looked back at it and I said, well, where is the time going, really? And what I realized was I was spending so much time, admittedly, and guilty, sitting in bed, scrolling stuff at night, not going to sleep, and staying up till like 11 o'clock or midnight, waking up, groggy as all hell, and like just kind of like taking my time going to bed, taking my time getting up, and going, that is like 1 to 2 hours. There's my time. You want an extra hour in the day, Shan? Put the damn phone down and go to bed.
Yeah.
And like it's a simple task, but it's so hard for people to like shift out of habits, right? And go, I have to consciously get myself out of this habit. What I think is relaxing is actually taking away from tomorrow morning, because I could wake up an hour earlier, I could go to the gym, and then I wouldn't feel like crap about, I never fit in my workout today.
Yeah, I mean, giving yourself a bedtime is actually one of my favorite time management rules.
Yeah,
not saying
it's
that
worked
you can't,
immensely.
You can't. I mean, if you want to stay up late, you can. I mean, you're a grown up, but at least having a time when you intend to be in bed more nights than not forces you to make a decision. Like as you're coming up on your bedtime, it's like, well, am I doing anything that's worth staying up for? And if I am, great. But if I'm not, well, maybe just turn it off. Go to bed earlier. Maybe I'll be able to get up a little bit earlier and turn those completely unproductive evening hours into productive morning hours.
Exactly. And that's what I actually discovered was I was killing myself trying to stay up till midnight because I was more interested in going to bed feeling accomplished that I got the stuff done. But I realized I felt way worse if I had done that versus go to bed and finish it in the morning with a clear mind, with a more productive attitude. I find that for me, I would rather get up at 5 and start working on something, I'm so much more productive with that clarity and like not having a ton of stuff in my head and exhaustion from the day, like waking up fresh and diving into something and getting it done faster than dragging myself through just so I can, at night just to go to bed after. It took me a long time because I come from big four accounting corporate culture where that's the expectation. You're going to work till midnight, get the stuff done, and then we'll see you tomorrow at 7. And it takes a lot to unravel that. It does. But once you make that shift, I was like, wow, I would so much rather just leave it unfinished overnight and be at peace with that. And then know I'm going to get it done and done better tomorrow.
Yeah. A lot of people are more focused in the morning. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And so, it's always funny to me. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not a morning person. But when people say that, some of them are night owls. But the way to tell is if you're doing your most creative, best work at night. And if you are, great. But if you aren't, like you're just scrolling around on your phone, the reason you probably think you're not a morning person is because you're tired in the morning. But that is a function of when you went to bed the night before. And so, if there's a certain time you need to wake up and there's a certain amount of sleep you need, you are much better off simply counting back that number of hours from your wake up time, going to bed at that time. It's just a math problem, figure it out, than trying to skimp some nights and then, have your body force you to make it up somewhere else. This is one of the things that I've found from studying thousands of people's schedules over the years is for people who are not chronic insomniacs, there's often a very strong sleep set point. And if you skimp on it for a couple nights, you're going to be forced to make it up one way or another. Your body is going to force you to substitute sleep for other activities later in the week or over the course of a couple of weeks. And maybe that's okay, but maybe you would have rather used that time for something else. I mean, I think a lot of us would like to have more time on the weekend, right? Like if you are able to wake up at 7 on a Saturday morning instead of you're forced to crash until 9 or 10, because you are slow sleep deprived. Like your Saturday just looks entirely different, like what you can accomplish, what you can do with it, how much time you have for various things, maybe some time before family responsibilities kick in. And that only happens if you go into the weekend without a sleep debt.
Yeah, I've been in that position too many times where like, oh, I'll make it up this weekend and you just crash, but then you're groggy. It's like you have a whole day to just recover from the week as opposed to actually enjoying it.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to spend your weekends just recovering from the week. You want to actually enjoy your family and leisure time.
Perfect. And what other, so obviously sleep, working, I'm assuming working in some type of movement can also help maximize like productivity and the way that you're mindfully using your schedule too. Are there other things that you think are kind of staple elements in your time management that people probably should work in somewhere during the course of the week?
Well, one thing I suggest, I have kind of like 9 favorite time management rules that I actually covered in a recent book, and we've been going through a lot of them here. But one of them is to batch the little things. And so we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of batching of, like checking email for 20 minutes and then doing other things for 40 minutes and checking email for 20 minutes. But in general, I mean, people can wind up feeling pulled in a million directions when they have lots of little tasks they have to accomplish. And this can be the case personally as well. I know a lot of people, feel like, well, I have all these home responsibilities I have to do. I'm trying to get my work done, but I also have to make doctor's appointments for people, and I have to buy these birthday presents, and I have to, make sure that the dog sitter is booked for next week and whatever else it is. And you feel like, well, I keep doing this. I can never do anything. And, it may be true that you could get help with some of these things. And maybe these, tasks should be shared more equitably among people in your life. But regardless of that, you can lessen the mental hold they have over you by giving them a designated time. So I often wind up creating what I call a Friday punch list, which is a bunch of small tasks that weren't urgent, but need to get done at some point. And I do them all in one fell swoop on Fridays. And so that's when I'm like, fill out that permission form, book that, whatever it is I have to do, that hotel room, answer that non-urgent email, do this, whatever it is. And, you feel like, ooh, I got through a lot of stuff. But what that does is not only you can stop thinking about it the rest of the week because it's on the list for Friday and you can do it then. Or, if you want to make a batch list for every day for the end of the day, you can do that as well. But it also keeps you from using it as a procrastination tool. Because a lot of times, you want to work on something challenging, you have to solve a difficult problem. You're like, but I have to buy that birthday present. Next thing you know, you're over at Amazon buying that birthday present instead of working on this thing that you were supposed to do. And you can tell yourself that you had to do it, but you didn't have to do it then. That was a choice. That was a procrastination choice. And so by giving these things a time, you reduce that possibility.
I think, and I've done that so many times because I think I want to feel more accomplished. I'm going to get a lot of little easier things done instead of the big thing that's hard. So I can just get the gratification of checking off the same real estate on the to-do list of like, I got 3 out of 8 things done. It's yeah, but like the 5 things that you didn't do are the biggest things on there that are going to take 3 days to do. So I definitely get this little like kick from, oh yeah, I checked it off the box. Like I feel accomplished. And then you realize, oh yeah, I did all the easiest stuff. And I love the idea of a punch list of going, I have the intention to group this together and do this in one focused hour where I'm basically just doing all the small tasks for that and not letting them distract me or create more delays in doing the bigger things. I love that idea.
Excellent.
Awesome. Laura, thank you so much for hopping on the show today and sharing all these tips. Where can folks find out more about all of these books that you've written? Can you just name your podcasts, your books, everything? Just kind of share with us where people can find out more about you and all of your knowledge.
Yeah, well, you can come visit my website, which is lauravanderkam.com. That's just my name. And you can learn about my most recent book, which is called Tranquility by Tuesday, 9 Ways to Calm the Chaos and Make Time for What Matters. We've been talking about a handful of those rules today and in some of these questions. I host 2 podcasts. One is called Before Breakfast, which is a short every weekday morning tip to help you take your day from great to awesome. And then I co-host one with my friend Sarah Hart Unger that's called Best of Both Worlds. We have new episodes every Tuesday. It's about the intersection of work and life from the perspective of people who really enjoy both. So, a lot of encouraging talk about work and family there.
I love it. No need to feel guilty, guys. Don't guilt yourselves. Don't, punish yourselves for not getting stuff done. Take your day from great to awesome with Laura and all of her content. Laura, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, real talk. Our business can really mess with our emotions and our mindset. Am I right? One day we feel like we're unstoppable, like we could run through a wall, and then the next we want to burn it all down and start from scratch. Hey, I'm with you. A lot of this has to do with how we approach our money. And if you need a quick jolt of mindset habits for the next 5 days to help you reboot and recalibrate, check out my 5-day financial mindset refresh delivered straight to your email. Click the link in the show notes to sign up right now. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. This small action goes a long way for podcasters to get our message heard by more business owners just like you. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to information about our guests and ways to get in touch with me. We'll see you on the next episode.